Let's welcome back to this edition of this Global Trade Adventure, sponsored by the World Trade Center, Kentucky. We're very happy to be back in the studio today with Dr. Omar Ayyash, the president and CEO of the World Trade Center. Omar, how are you?
Good. How are you, Jim?
Buddy, I'm doing well, and I'm very excited for the first time to introduce David Lopez, founder of Insight Consulting, who is got an interesting story here to talk to us about. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Omar, and I'll take it back up at the end of the program.
Thank you, Jim. It's really a pleasure to be with you here today, everyone, talking about this global trade adventure hosted by the World Trade Center, Kentucky, where we tell stories about how to conduct international trade. And we've got a wonderful guest with us here today. David, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here with you all. Yeah, thanks for welcoming me.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of the work that you do around the city and around the country, and we've had many interactions. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. Yeah. So born and raised in San Diego, California. And my parents are from Mexico. They moved to this country 3 months before I was born. And for anyone who knows about San Diego, you know that San Diego is right on the border with Mexico, which meant that I really grew up in two countries. I grew up in the U.S. and I grew up in Mexico. San Diego and Tijuana, Spanish, English. And so when you grow up like that, I think it's impossible to not kind of always be thinking about world trade, thinking about immigration, thinking about all of those topics that I know you all cover on the podcast.
Yeah, you remind me of my childhood too, in the sense that, I grew up in Vienna, Austria, and almost every day I would walk by the bank, and outside the door of the bank, there'll be a big sign with all the different currencies. And you get to see what the dollar is in relations to every other major currency. Yep. And I think that changes your mindset. So, it's interesting that you've already, started today by that perspective. So tell us, what was your childhood like?
Yeah. So, weekdays were in San Diego because that's where my parents had settled. And so I'd go to school in San Diego. They would work in San Diego. But then weekends were in Tijuana. So we would cross the border, and back to this whole commerce thing that you're referencing, groceries were more affordable in Tijuana. So we would go and we'd buy our groceries in Tijuana. We would go do our laundry there. Of course, we'd visit our family there. And so, yeah, from a very early age, I had to think about, well, what's the conversion rate between pesos and dollars? And when I was growing up, it was 3,000 pesos to the dollar. And whether you realize it or not, as a child, that really starts to inform the way that you view the world. You realize that there's not just one currency, there's many. You realize there's not just one language, there's many, not just one country, there's many. And so, again, it's a really interesting way to grow up because as opposed to, I think, the average U.S. American who tends to realize those things when they're older, when you grow up on the border and crossing borders, you kind of know that from the very beginning.
Wow. How incredible. How fortunate to have to gone through that experience. And you were set up for international trade from,
right.
Year one. Okay. Let's fast forward.
Travel at least.
Yeah, at the very least.
Let's forward. When did you arrive in Kentucky and why would you leave San Diego to Louisville?
So I get that question a lot. Of course, people know about the weather in San Diego. The average temperature is 72 degrees and sunny. People have visited on vacation or for conferences, and so they loved being in that kind of eternal spring environment. And there is a lot that San Diego offers, especially being on the border and having that opportunity to be kind of in two countries at once. That said, I met a Kentucky gal when I was in Houston. I was
Say
there.
That again, Kentucky gal.
Kentucky gal. Yeah, I met a Kentucky gal. Her dad's from Henderson, Kentucky. He's multi-generational Hendersonian. He met a woman from an island off the coast of Honduras, and they built their family here in Kentucky. So now, it was just a very 1 in a million type chance that she was in the same program that I was. She was in Teach for America, being a teacher in San Antonio, and I was in Houston. We met at the same training school over the summer. And I knew that one day, because of that connection that we made, that would mean that we'd probably end up somewhere closer to her parents. I do really want to take a moment to give a lot of credit to Louisville because we knew we wanted to move closer to her parents, but we didn't necessarily know it was going to be Louisville. And so we looked into all of the usual places, Nashville, Cincinnati, Louisville, St. Louis, lots of the sort of cities that people think about when they think of this region. Louisville was the one place where people went way above and beyond to help us make connections, to help make introductions. People really wanted to see us move here, and they were really willing to give of themselves and give of their networks to make it happen.
David, I hear that a lot, actually. I was in a boardroom not too long ago with some high-level people that were doing the same thing, and they chose to set up their office and their existence here. And, you bring me back to my earlier life in the city of Louisville when I worked for Mayor Abramson, and we were merging the city and the county government. One of the things he tasked me with was to bring back the Heritage Festival. And I went around, spoke to the immigrant and refugee community, and the conclusion was we won't be able to bring back the Heritage Weekends, but we'll bring a new format, which is World Fest. And I started World Fest back in 2003. And the focus was on making sure that our community celebrates the different cultures and creates a welcoming environment for that. I know that you're involved with the immigrant community and the Hispanic community, so this is the segue to that. Tell us about your work to that.
Yeah, so when I moved here in 2018, one of the first things that I noticed is that I wasn't running into my Latin Hispanic community as often as I would in San Diego. It makes sense, right? San Diego, there are cities within the county of San Diego that are 98, 99% Latin Hispanic background. When I come to Louisville, I find that I kind of have to go look on the Preston corridor. I have to go look at specific organizations, maybe like La Casita or Americana. So I was having to seek out that Latin Hispanic community. Eventually, I run into a really important organization here locally, the Louisville Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And there were several board members at that time that I got to know fairly quickly after moving to Louisville. And they were really great because they understood that I had just moved here, that I was seeking those connections to my Latin Hispanic roots. And so they started to invite me to Hispanic Chamber events. They offered to add me to the board. So I joined the board in 2019. And then in 2023, I had the opportunity to step in as chair of the board. And so now it's been, 8 years of involvement with the Hispanic Chamber. And it's been one of the most rewarding things that I've done here locally.
Fantastic. And I see the work and the fruits of the work that you're doing. One of the things that I want to highlight on, recently you invited me during the Kentucky Derby Festival to be involved in a fantastic program that you're putting on. It's the Derby Pitch program.
You got it.
Or festival.
Derby Pitch.
Okay. Yeah. Tell us about what goes on with that,
Yeah. So when I took over as chair, one of the things that I was hearing a lot from both the board members as well as from the membership of the chamber was, look, the chamber started in 2014. We've been doing really important work. COVID did put a pause on some of the work that we were doing, like it did for many organizations. And so we're feeling like we really want to do more to raise the profile of the chamber. We want to do more to raise the profile of the overall Latin Hispanic small business community and entrepreneurial community. Let's do something big. Let's do something that really sort of calls a lot more attention to the growing Latin Hispanic community here and the contributions that we're making to the economy, to the culture. And so one of the things that came out of those discussions was this idea of Derby Pitch. Obviously, Derby Week here in Louisville is a big deal. It's the biggest celebration. And I think for many, many years, the Latin Hispanic community was wondering, what's our unique space during that week? What is the one thing that we can call our own? And one of the things that came out of that conversation, again, was let's do something during Derby Week that puts a spotlight on the Latin Hispanic community. And it ended up being Derby Pitch.
Fantastic. And one of the things that I think that was unique is the entrepreneurial spirit celebrated with the Derby Festival, but you also bring people from across the country to be either to pitch or to be judges, right?
Yeah. So thankfully, we had a really strong connection at the chamber for a long time with GE Appliances. They were one of our strongest corporate sponsors. One gentleman in particular there in talent acquisition, Rudy Martinez, he and I were dreaming up this Derby pitch idea, and he says, I know the CEO of Angeles Investors. Angeles Investors is the largest network of Latin Hispanic angel investors in the country. And so we approached them. David Olivencia is the CEO. We pitched them on the pitch idea that we had. He loved it. Everyone loves the idea of coming to Louisville during Derby week.
Right.
And he said, let's do something together. And so from the very first year, this wasn't just a local or regional event. It actually became a national event. And we were able to tap into that Angeles Investors Network and bring investors and entrepreneurs from across the country and combine them or, bring them together with our local entrepreneurs and investors. And so first year we had about 130 people in attendance. Second year that got up to 230. And then the event you were just at recently during Derby week was 270, 280 people in attendance at the Fraser Museum. So we've seen a tremendous amount of growth. Obviously, I think this is really striking a chord with both local audiences and national audiences.
For sure. And it really is wonderful. So you've already highlighted, as a kid, this global mindset, then coming here, the fact that we're a welcoming community, the fact that we have great festivals, great programs, great entrepreneurial spirit, but also, when you think about the number of years that you've been in this community and how connected you became very quickly, what advice would you give to someone who's listening to this podcast about being involved in the immigrant and refugee community, as well as the chambers of commerce, as well as the global trade? And I know that you sit now on One Louisville board, the Metro Chamber of Commerce, if you will, if that's what they call it, or the organization that's heading economic development.
Yeah, I've heard two stories, right? I've heard the folks who say, I came to Louisville and everyone opened doors for me and it was wonderful. I've also heard the people who say, I came to Louisville and everyone wanted to know where I went to high school. It seemed like all of the networks were already, decades old.
You mean you didn't go to Trinity? I went to San Diego. Atherton. No, I'm kidding.
Right. So, I've heard both stories. And I think both are absolutely true. And I think people do have very different experiences. I was very blessed in that I was able to tap into some networks early on.
I was too, David. That's it. We're both transplants here from halfway around the world. And, we're leading business people in this community.
Well, and my advice, my piece of advice would be find your 2 or 3 people. To start, it doesn't take that many people.
Right.
Find your 2 or 3 people that you really connect with that are willing to open some of those doors initially, and then you take it from there. Those 2 to 3 people introduce you to 2 or 3 people, 2 to 3 people introduce you to another 2 to 3 people. So that's one piece of advice. The other piece of advice is to then find your 1 or 2 organizations that you want to really be involved with. So maybe that is a chamber of commerce. Maybe that's a nonprofit organization. A lot of times organizations struggle to find board members or advisory board members, and people sometimes can be shy about raising their hand and saying, sure, I'll join a board. To me, that's one of the best ways to connect into a community is you give in service and you get a lot back from that service.
So you get me to think about, my own experience from a leadership perspective. And one of the things that I can highlight on being in the United States of America as an immigrant that came here as an international student at the age of 17, what the United States has given me on top of the business skills, on top of the education skills, the cultural skills, it gave me leadership skills. It really taught me how to network and be engaged and be part of that community. And I now in 2026 worry about that a little bit because I feel, the new culture is very much focused on being behind a screen, not spending as much face time. And we've talked about this, Jim, before.
Yeah.
What's your thought about that? Being engaged, being present, being at the table?
I have to agree that we're living in a moment where all of us, I think, are spending way more time behind the screen than we would prefer. And that's certainly true for young people as well. And so I do think that as we move into the future, it'll take more and more intentionality for people to say, I'm going to put down the phone, I'm going to set aside the laptop, I'm going to get out to the real world, I'm going to actually go and engage with people, I'm going to serve on a board where I have to be in person or I have to be engaging with other people that care about some of the same causes in the community. I think about that a lot because of my kids. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter. I have a 7.5-year-old son. They are absolutely coming up in the age of screens. They're coming up in the age of AI. One really neat thing that I think is both neat and also I have to think about, what does this mean for him? My son will go up and start asking questions of Alexa. He'll say, Alexa, what animal can go the deepest in the ocean? And for me, that's so cool that he gets a chance to kind of ask that question and have someone that's always going to be ready to answer that question for him and let him, learn about the world and the universe. And, at the same time, how do I ensure that he's also developing those skills for interacting with other human beings and not just with Alexa?
Who is Alexa? No, I'm just kidding. Is it your neighbor's daughter?
That's
No.
right. That's right.
It's Siri's cousin.
Siri's cousin. Anyhow, no, David, we're really proud of the work that you're doing here and how you help the community, the business community, transform itself into the right situation. So, one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past, I remember. About 4 or 5 months ago, you called me and you had just shared that you just come off of a trip traveling in South America. And one of the countries that you were in was Colombia. And the focus of our conversation was around the trade missions again.
Yeah.
That, we do the trade missions to Dubai and the World Trade Center has done trade missions all over the world. We're in 2027 getting ready to do another trade mission to Vietnam. So tell us about your experience being in Colombia and maybe other countries and how hungry and interested they are for Kentucky businesses.
Yeah. So I had the incredible opportunity to visit 2 countries recently last December. One was Colombia, the other one was Panama. And absolutely. Everyone there was immediately interested in learning more about the Louisville Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, learning more about Derby Pitch, learning more about Kentucky. You have countries that have developed immensely in the last 20, 30 years in terms of their own economies, in terms of their own trade. And when those countries are coming up, they immediately start looking to the US as their expansion target. So, whenever I would talk to someone in Colombia or in Panama, they would be thinking, hey, maybe this is a chance for me to get my foot in the door in the United States. And I think for some of these countries, a state like Kentucky feels more accessible than thinking I have to go compete in Miami or I have to go compete in New York City. That feels very daunting. But the idea of coming to a place like Kentucky that's relatively smaller, where there's not as many Latin, Hispanic businesses or enterprises already in the market, it just feels more accessible to them. So I would say that's one of the things that felt really attracted to them. The other thing was once they understood how much the Latin Hispanic community has grown in Kentucky. So a lot of folks kind of know vaguely that the Latin Hispanic community has grown. They don't realize that it's grown by 331% since the year 2000. So
what
more
was that
than
again?
tripled. 331% growth in the Latin Hispanic population since the year 2000. And that trajectory is going to look relatively similar. And so when the Latin Hispanic countries, hear about the growth that exists here, the fact that it's going to be a welcoming state that's interested in establishing those connections with global trade, they get really interested.
So I'm going to segue to a different thing, but we'll come back to this thing because I'm very interested about Colombia and Panama and what have you. But when someone is sitting here and they're listening about maybe that change that's happening and they're fearing that change, what piece of advice might you give them to embrace the change in a positive way from a workforce development perspective?
From a workforce development perspective, Kentucky is, like many states, worried about the trajectory of the workforce.
100%.
They're seeing the way that birth rates are going, and they're seeing the way that workforce participation is going, and they're worried about whether we already have enough workers now, and even worse, what the gaps might be in the workforce in 10 years or 20 years. So one statistic that really stood out to me recently as I was looking at the latest statistics on the population growth of the Latin Hispanic community is that the average age in Kentucky of just the, not looking at any different demographics, but just the average person in Kentucky, the age is nearly 40 years old. When you look at the average age of the Latin Hispanic population in Kentucky, the average age is about 29 years. And so it's a dramatically younger population that's in the state of Kentucky. It's also a dramatically younger age across all of Latin America on average. And what we know, of course, is that when it comes to workforce, the more years that people have ahead of them in terms of being able to be in the workforce, the better. And so that's one thing that I would emphasize is just if we're thinking workforce and you're thinking about the future of workforce, the fact that you're working with a younger population on average is a really good thing when it comes to having more Latin Hispanic folks here. Let's look at the entrepreneurial side. Latin Hispanic people across the United States are starting businesses at a higher rate than any other demographic. In the state of Kentucky alone, there's more than 18,000 Latin Hispanic owned businesses. And that's a number from 2023. So that number is probably quite a bit higher 3 years later.
So the conversation that we're having here today really highlights a number of different things that we're very focused on. World Trade Center Kentucky is part of 330 World Trade Centers in 91 countries, and we foster growing international trade. But in the essence, we're an economic development agency. And we're very much focused on how we upskill the workforce. We're very much focused on how we create a welcoming community. We're very much focused on how we help the community embrace its multicultural aspects. And one of the things that we do as a result of that, we've been very involved with the academic institutions here to do cross-cultural understanding courses across the board. And in essence, really the reason I do this, David, is because I tell people it's regardless of whether you're going to travel overseas, your workforce here is going to look very different from what it has been. And so you need to understand the cultural values that exist. And the numbers that you've highlighted are fantastic in that. So with that, what are some of the things that you think we need to embrace as a community to continue to support our multiculturalism?
Well, I mean, let's go back to my trip to Colombia and Panama, right? So in Colombia, I ended up connecting with a group called Rockstart. And Rockstart is sort of a combination of accelerator, VC, network of angel investors, et cetera. And they think are primarily based out of Colombia, but end up doing work across Latin America. And one of the really cool things that they said when we first started speaking to them is, would you like us to help bring a unicorn founder to Derby Pitch? So what does a unicorn founder mean? That means someone who has started a company that hit $1 billion in valuation or more, right? One of those $1 billion unicorn companies. It's very rare to find Latin Hispanic founders in the US that have started a unicorn company, but it's not rare across Latin America. And so for us, we think it would be incredible to be able to bring at some point some of those unicorn founders from across Latin America. One of them that comes to mind, for example, started the Colombian version of DoorDash, essentially. And so if we could bring them to the US, what an incredible connection to build between those two countries, but also the inspiration for entrepreneurs here, especially those of Latin Hispanic background that say, gosh, if they're able to do it in Latin America, why can't I do it here in the US as well? In Panama, we connected with what's essentially the Ministry of Innovation there. And they were thinking a lot about opportunities for us to contribute judges for their entrepreneurship competitions. They were thinking about how they might be able to bring some of their entrepreneurs to pitch at Derby Pitch. And so I think what can we be doing? We can be building more of those connections between us and Latin America. I think you have a region that is incredibly important in terms of world trade and is also eager to build even stronger connections with Kentucky and the US.
And we've got the platform for that. World Trade Center Kentucky is happy to work with you to connect with some of our World Trade Centers. I recently went to the World Trade Center Association Global Business Summit, and you'd be very surprised at how many World Trade Centers are very active in Latin America from that perspective. It's been a boom for our association. I can't tell you the numbers, but I want to say there's at least 10 World Trade Centers in Mexico that are very active in places that I've never heard of. Durango, I met the people from Durango. I need to go back on and look on a map where that is. But this is really exciting in the sense that entrepreneurship really drives that.
Mhm.
And again, you want to look at the history of Kentucky in that perspective. When we have had the Humanas of the world and the Papa Johns of the world and so many great companies rise from entrepreneurial being, the same has happened in hubs like in Colombia, Panama, Dubai, and things of that nature. And we look forward to working with you on possibly establishing a trade mission to that part of the world and taking some Kentucky companies there.
I think that if we did that, it would be wonderful. I think that people would receive us with a lot of excitement. I think there'd be absolutely new connections that are established and would further contribute to the economic vibrancy of this state, of the Commonwealth. A couple of more numbers, right? So, folks obviously hear a lot about trade with China, 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 China. It's a big part of the conversation, of course, as it should be. But when we look at some of the numbers, Latin America as a whole represents about 20% of the trade with the U.S. That's a huge portion of the overall trade. And I think in 2023, for the first time, and I don't know if that's remained in 25 and 24, but in 2023, Mexico actually became a larger trade partner than China. It grew. And so, again, as people are thinking about the overall economic vibrancy of the U.S. and of Kentucky, I think many times the partnerships with Latin America and the trade with Latin America actually gets underplayed in terms of the headlines. But if we can really lean into those collaborations and those partnerships and get a little bit more of attention on just how much value they bring, I think it'll be good for all parties involved.
Yeah, David, one of the things that we're getting ready to do is World Trade Day. And in August, the 25th and the 26th here in Louisville, we're bringing global guests, countries, speakers. And one of the speakers that I'm bringing, the keynote breakfast speaker, is going to focus exactly on what you just highlighted on. And it is how, trade policy comes into play and the news takes it in one direction. And yes, you need that. But Liberation Day has actually shifted a lot of the trade from China into Mexico. And there's been a lot more nearshoring that's happened as a result of that. So if you're interested in all this information, make sure you attend World Trade Day this August here in Louisville. And, we look forward to having you. So, what are some of the most exciting projects you're working on today that, the speakers would be interested in hearing about?
I mean, I think one of the most interesting topics that we could be talking about in this community is supply chain innovation.
That's it.
That's the big one. That's the big one. And of course, why does this come up? It comes up because it is such a built-in strength of this region. There are many, many things geographically and infrastructure-wise that can't be AI-ified. I don't know if people are necessarily saying that or not, but as we worry about what could be actually a competitive strength that is maintained and grown in our region, I think logistics and supply chain is generally understood as one, if not the competitive advantage to lean into. And I think with what is happening with AI, it prevents this really unique window of time where in the past, many times, Louisville and Kentucky got the execution of supply chain innovation, but not necessarily the design and the management of the supply chain innovation. AI is turning that on its head because in the past, you may need 1,000 or 10,000 person company with a tremendous amount of capital to produce the supply chain innovations. With AI, you have now teams that are 10 people, 20 people, 30 people that are actually producing these enterprise level innovations. And of course, the usual forces are going to concentrate things back into the coasts like they normally do. But I think over the next 3 to 5 years, if Louisville really plays it right and this Commonwealth plays it right, we could see some of those innovations actually being designed and executed here without having to rely on the capital and the workforce of the coast to make it happen.
Wow, what a topic. And I've seen you actually, you've done a couple of conference talks on that. You've done a couple of roundtables, and I applaud you for continuing that mission. David, I'm a big fan of the work that you're doing. We're lucky to have brought you in here from San Diego or other parts of the country. I know that, your weekends as a child in Tijuana were pretty exciting, but I wouldn't be surprised your weekends to Southern Indiana are equally as exciting here, right?
I like to say I also get to cross the border here. It's just a little different than when it was in San Diego.
Thank you again, and I look forward to a solid partnership between both of our organizations.
Yep. Friends, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Once again, we cover such a broad range of topics here on the podcast. Sometimes we talk about supply chain management. You look back at Miguel Zamora from the Foreign Trade Zone here in Louisville. We've had people on from UPS. We've had guys on from Givaudan, Steve Marks. We've had people on from Papa John's talking about supply chain management and how important it is. And again, hearing David talk today about the next opportunity for Louisville, which may be supply chain management oriented. But we hope you've enjoyed the video podcast. Please let us know how we're doing. If there's another topic you'd like to hear about, by all means, in the LinkedIn post and the Facebook post, let us know what you think. And if you have a topic or if you'd like to actually be a guest on the podcast, reach out and let us know. But from all of us here at the World Trade Center's This Global Trade Adventure podcast, thanks for joining us.